4-year-old Heidi wakes up in the middle of the night and looks through the keyhole of her bedroom door, witnessing a horrific scene that will remain etched in her memory forever. What she sees is the tragic murder of her mother, Loretta. Authorities learn that the young woman had a boyfriend named Tom, and this man, whom they see as the sole suspect, is immediately arrested and interrogated. However, after being held for about 3 months, he is released due to lack of evidence, and for nearly 50 years. Before the case file was marked unsolved, this photo of Heidi standing in front of the murder scene was taken. I don't understand why such a photo of the little child was taken while her mother's blood was still on the ground. But this photo will prove to you that many things that seem meaningless are not without reason, that everything has a meaning even if we don't know it at the time, and that it is trying to point something out to us. Although no one realized at the time that this photo held a big secret that would solve the murder, years later the truth would come out thanks to this photo. As we head into that dark night, if you liked the video, please don't forget to like it and subscribe if you haven't already. We are in a small town called Price in the state of Utah in America. Loretta Jones was a 24-year-old single mother. Heidi was her 4-year-old daughter, and the two were living a very happy life. That is, until the evening of Thursday, July the 30th, 1970. Early that evening, when Loretta told her daughter to go to her room and sleep, the little girl went to her bed and immediately fell asleep. Shortly after, there was a knock at the door, and the person who came was Loretta's boyfriend. When she let him in, he went straight to the point and said he wanted to have sex with her. When the young woman refused, she went to the kitchen to get away from him, and when she returned to the living room a short time later, she noticed the man coming towards her with a knife in his hand. Seconds later, he jumped on her and began stabbing her in the chest. When Loretta tried to escape, the man stabbed her in the back, and the helpless woman fell between the couch and the coffee table. As she was dying from her injuries, the man sexually assaulted her, and shortly after, the young woman died. After a while, Heidi woke up to a noise. It was probably the sound of the killer fleeing that woke her up. Looking through the keyhole, she noticed something strange in the middle of the living room that looked like a pile of laundry. Curious to find out what it was, she went to check and saw her mother lying on the floor, covered in blood. It was a horrific image that would never be erased from her mind. You are only 4 years old and have no real understanding of death or dying, nor how to react in such a situation. Heidi ran outside, not knowing what to do in front of her mother's lifeless body. At that moment, when a friend from the neighborhood said he wanted to show her something, her response was, "I don't think I can. My mother is dead." When the authorities arrived at the scene, it was clear that the young woman had died hours earlier. She had been stabbed repeatedly with a knife in her back, chest, and neck with great fury. Her clothes were also in a strange state. It was very clear from this that she had been sexually assaulted. The investigation revealed no signs of forced entry into the house. Therefore, it was clear that Loretta knew her attacker and had allowed him to enter of her own free will. Despite the horrific attack, Heidi told the police officer that she hadn't heard her mother scream. Furthermore, the young woman had almost no defensive wounds. What was understood in this situation was this: she had done everything in her power not to wake her daughter, afraid that she would come out of her room and be harmed, and despite all the pain she suffered, she spent her last moments protecting her little girl. A detailed medical examination of the body revealed that she had been killed with a small, narrow knife, stabbed 17 times in the back and twice in the chest. Furthermore, although semen samples found on her body would easily identify a perpetrator today, DNA was still in its infancy at that time, so no match could be made. While investigating the murder, detectives uncovered another shocking incident. On the evening Loretta was killed, a man attempted to abduct a 10-year-old girl named Lori Fennell, who lived in the same neighborhood, while she was riding her bike outside. However, the little girl managed to scare off the attacker by screaming, and the man fled. Lori remembered 2 things. The man wore a strange colored hat, and he left her and started running toward the house of Loretta and her daughter Heidi. The police realized that the attempted abduction had taken place about an hour before the young woman was killed. This suggested that the same person could be responsible for 2 separate attacks on women in the same neighborhood on the same day. When the police questioned Heidi, she said that before going to bed that night, she heard a man's voice in the house that she thought might be her mother's boyfriend, Tom. She even said that the person who attacked her mother was that same man. When the police questioned Heidi, she said that before going to sleep that night, she heard a man's voice in the house that she thought might be her mother's boyfriend, Tom, and even said that he was the one who attacked her mother. While trying to find out who this man was, the authorities examined Loretta's diary and found someone named Tom Egley, whom she had been with for only about 2 months. 30-year-old Tom was a vagrant type, and his record was not exactly clean. Tom, 30, was a vagrant type, and his record was not exactly clean. When he came to the police station for questioning, he said he had spent the day Loretta was killed in town, eating and drinking and looking at stores. During the interrogation, the police said that a bar owner had seen him looking very nervous that night and that his shirt had red stains all over it that looked like blood. He explained that this could be paint that had gotten on him because he was painting. Although he could not provide satisfactory answers to the questions about the murder, he denied committing the crime, and as a result of the interrogation, no information was obtained. However, when Tom was questioned again a few days later, little Lori, who had been attempted to be abducted by a man in the neighborhood where the incident took place, identified him as the man who tried to kidnap her. Thus, Tom was sentenced to 90 days in prison for attempted child abduction. Although all suspicions pointed to him as the person who killed Loretta, there was insufficient evidence to prosecute him for this crime. In this photo, Tom is seen comfortably chatting with a police chief, walking with him in the courthouse parking lot, cigarette in hand. It was the day he was taken to court to find out if he would stand trial. However, due to insufficient evidence, when the judge dismissed the case on November 5, 1970, Tom, the suspected murderer and child abductor, moved to the state of Colorado after serving his 3-month sentence. Moved to Colorado as a free man in early 1971. While a family mourned every day, he began living a comfortable life here, using drugs and alcohol. Heidi was adopted by her grandparents in 1973 and raised by them. Loretta's 5 sisters and 3 brothers became like Heidi's own siblings. She cherished her memories of her mother, including the fact that she was tall and gorgeous, smelled wonderful, and loved music. Her mother's diary somehow made her feel close to her. Even though the only suspect had been released, the thought that he had killed her mother and gotten away with it was always in the back of her mind. As the years passed, Heidi moved to California and began living there. In 1989, when she turned 24, the same age her mother was when she was murdered, she watched a television program about unsolved cases and sent letters to various police departments, even the FBI, asking for the case to be reopened. However, she received no positive response. By 2006, she had returned to Utah to be closer to her family, especially her grandmother, whose health was deteriorating. Returning here had rekindled her desire to revisit her mother's case. In 2009, she posted on her Facebook account that her car had been stolen. David Brewer, a high school friend she hadn't seen in years, was one of the people who commented on the post, and they started talking. Heidi then learned that David was a detective and asked him for help with the case, saying that she had been struggling her whole life with the psychological consequences of finding her mother dead. Although she expected him to turn her down due to the low probability of solving the murder, David was quite moved by the story. He agreed to reinvestigate the case and immediately got to work. His first task was to review the case files, but all the case documents and police records had disappeared. This was quite strange because case files don't usually disappear. Apart from a few newspaper articles, they had very little to go on. This meant they would have to re-interview the officers who worked on the case, the forensic experts, and the witnesses. However, by that time, most of the people involved in the case were either dead or very old. An investigation was launched based on details gathered from past media reports. When David asked Heidi to recount everything she remembered about that night, Heidi remembered a box of her mother's belongings at her grandmother's house. As she found and read her diary, she began to remember more about that night. She was probably remembering things that had faded in her young mind over time. When David told her that all the documents and crime scene photos had been lost, Heidi remembered this photo taken at the scene days after her mother's death. While the living room floor was still stained with her mother's blood, one of her relatives had taken a photo of the little girl standing there. The only thing left was this eerie crime scene photo, which held a big secret. We'll come back to this in a moment. After tracking down some of the witnesses mentioned in the newspapers, David decided to talk to another girlfriend Tom had at the time. According to his girlfriend, Tom came home very late the night Loretta was killed and rushed into the bathroom fully clothed. The next day, he went to the laundromat, and when he returned, several pieces of clothing were missing. In addition, a nearby business owner had seen him next to a burning barrel. Townspeople often used these barrels to burn their trash or old clothes. This explains why Tom burned the missing clothes there. At that time, the couple got married shortly after, so the woman was unable to testify against him. Based on these details, Detective David decided to visit Tom in Colorado. When he asked him questions about the case, he said he remembered that one of his ex-girlfriends had been murdered, but couldn't remember her name. However, strangely enough, he could remember very clearly what he did that day, including the food he ate. David was sure he was the killer, but like those before him, he had no concrete physical evidence. Therefore, the only option left was to obtain a DNA sample from Loretta. To do this, in July 2016, they decided to exhume Loretta's body from the grave and match Tom's DNA with any possible DNA traces on the young woman's body. Unfortunately, because it had been buried for over 40 years, the coffin had collapsed and the body had suffered extensive water damage, so naturally, nothing of note was found. David and his team announced the exhumation to the public, keeping the lack of evidence a secret. They told the press that they had found DNA samples and were examining them. In fact, this was a complete lie. After years in water, there was no trace left of the body, let alone DNA samples. The goal was to create the perception that they had found something in Toma and see how he would react. They stated they were excited about the results as an attempt to scare him into revealing himself. The news of the exhumation brought some important clues to light. The most frightening and shocking of these came from a woman named Linda, who had lived with Loretta's family while she was a university student. Linda contacted the authorities and said that Loretta's killer might have written his name in blood at the scene of the crime. At first, they didn't believe her. However, after David re-examined the only crime scene photo he had, he clearly saw the letters T and O in the bloodstain on the ground. Now this photo made sense. In her final moments, the young woman had tried to provide a clue by writing the killer's name in her own blood. Thanks to this detail in the photo, they were able to identify 2 of the 3 letters in the killer's name, T and O, meaning Tom. He probably didn't have enough time to write the letter M. The number 1 suspect was Tom Egley again. Once more, all signs pointed to him. While Tom was watching the developments of the exhumation on TV, his paranoia about his DNA being found on the body increased, and he began questioning his relatives about how long DNA could remain on a body. He even asked a neighbor named Lisa Carter if she could look after his animals if he had to leave for a while. Then he started telling her how he killed Loretta. Lisa was shocked. She immediately contacted David and told him about Tom's confession. She suggested planting a listening device to get another confession. Although initially met with skepticism, the idea worked. A few days later, when Lisa brought up the subject again, Tom began to recount in more detail how he had committed the murder. Lisa: were you drunk? Tom: I was drunk, yes. Lisa: the door closed, and then what happened? Tom: my offer of sex was rejected. Tom recounted these events without hesitation. It was as if he were talking about a normal, everyday event. Like a news story. He had gone there that night to see Loretta and have sex with her. When the young woman rejected him, they fought. He lost control, stabbed her repeatedly with a knife, and sexually assaulted her as she took her last breath. He finally confessed. Lisa then convinced him to turn himself in to the police, and he did. If it weren't for this audio recording obtained thanks to Lisa, the case might still be unsolved today. Because when Loretta was exhumed 46 years later, her body was too deformed to obtain a DNA sample. So the DNA samples they saw as the only evidence to convict Tom were gone. The only way was to bluff him into confessing, and the perception operation they created worked. In August 2016, exactly 46 years later, Tom was finally arrested. The once young, burly Tom had become a wrinkled, stooped man who looked older than his 76 years. The judge found him guilty of murder and sentenced him to 10 years to life in prison. The man she knew from the beginning was responsible for her mother's death was finally behind bars. Thanks to her stubborn determination and the help of people who cared about finding justice for her mother, this unsolved case now had a clear outcome. Heidi is very happy that she can finally breathe easy, having vowed to keep Tom in prison until he dies. Okay, the killer was finally caught. Heidi will now have a little more peace in the rest of her life. But how fair is justice that comes 46 years later? Please don't forget to share your thoughts and opinions about this delayed justice in the comments. Now I'm off to prepare my next content for you. Take care. See you soon.